Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here as I announce the next step of my signature public safety initiative. I am joined today by our Deputy Mayor, Tony Barksdale, is with us, the fabulous director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety Engagement, Shantay Jackson, our Police Commissioner, Michael Harrison, Council Members Burnett, Bullock, and Torrance. I guess this would be the West Side trifecta is what this would be. We also have representatives from our State's Attorney's Office, our service providers, YAP, that's represented by Tyrone Kent, and ROCA, community leaders, and also known as Double Trouble, Ray Kelly, and Pastor Marvin McKinstry Jr. When we began the pilot to our group violence reduction strategy at the top of this year in the Western District, I always intended to expand this approach to other communities that, like the Western, have historically experienced high levels of group-involved violent crime. We know that the Western has always seen the highest historically, and eventually throughout all of Baltimore. Baltimore's comprehensive violence reduction prevention plan identifies the GVRS as a key component of my dual integrated violence prevention strategy. GVRS facilitates direct, sustained engagement with a small number of group-involved individuals who are the most likely to be the victim or perpetrator of violence. Through this strategy, the Office of Neighborhood Safety Engagement, overseen by Director Jackson, manages the coordination of law enforcement, justice system, community, and social service partners to offer individuals the resources to walk away from violence. Where necessary, GVRS creates swift, certain, and legitimate accountability for violence. Simply put, people who continue to engage in that violent activity after being told that we want them to do something different and engaged by the strategy will face immediate consequences. This truly is a all-hands-on-deck approach to public safety that leverages community moral voice and law enforcement intelligence to identify these at-risk individual relationships with community service providers to bring them in and offer them support services and an expansive partnership between law enforcement and prosecutors across various levels of government to hold offenders accountable. GVRS is about realizing that an act of violence doesn't start or end when someone pulls a trigger. There are so many points along the way where we can step in and intervene, and building meaningful, impactful public safety means creating pathways for behavioral health services, housing support, life coaching, case management, job training, and other resources to ensure that it never gets to that moment where a person feels the need to pull that trigger. We've been hard at work implementing this pilot for almost a year. So far, we have conducted 132 direct communication referrals and connected 71 participants to services ranging from life coaching to employment and, of course, housing assistance. We've also made 65 arrests through BPD's gun violence unit, which is also known as GVU, directly connected to GVRS. Thanks to these efforts, we are seeing that violence in the Western District, historically the most violent of Baltimore's police district, is down significantly. Homicides and non-fatal shootings are down a combined 33.8% in the Western District. Baltimore, I am proud to announce that the pilot in the Western is a success. And as we wrap up this first year, GVRS will scale up beginning with the Southwest District in the top of next year. Like the Western, the Southwestern has historically been one of our most violent police districts. I spent a lot of time visiting Carrollton Ridge. I was there last fall for my fall cleanup, and I was just there a few weeks ago delivering turkeys, but also in that cleanup with Ms. Tinsley, an incredible, great community leader and very familiar with the high levels of violence our residents face there. The same in Emerson Village, the same in Frederick Avenue, and so many parts of the Southwest District. Past iterations of GVRS have failed by either growing too quickly or not being intentional enough about laying the groundwork needed to improve outcomes. You have my commitment, Baltimore, that we will get it right this time around. There is no other option, which is why we're being highly intentional about expansion. by making sure our community partners have the resources that they need to provide those alternative services, building community relationships to identify those at risk of violence, and making sure the groundwork is in place to not just replicate the success from the Western, but most importantly, to sustain that success. Like I said before, this is a collaborative effort, and it wouldn't be possible without our law enforcement, community service providers, all of our partners, and most importantly, MONSE, for managing the day-to-day operations of this work. I want to thank you all for joining me in this work and this important work, because there is nothing more important than saving lives in the streets of Baltimore, but most importantly for us getting together to do this the right way, because we have to do it intentionally. We have to do it deliberately. We have to do it based on data. Fast is not always the way to go. If we learn anything in Baltimore, doing things quickly doesn't mean you're going to get sustainable results all the time. And with that, I will turn it over to our Police Commissioner, Commissioner Harrison. Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning to all of you. And thank you all for being here today for this very important announcement. As the mayor has stated, we know that the group violence reduction strategy is working. In the Western District, we've been piloting almost a year. Homicides are down, as you've heard, 36%, non-fatals 31%, and we've made 81 GVRS-related arrests to date. This strategy involves an intentional collaboration between our department, social service providers, and community members, in which we all work together to reach those who most want to be a part of the solution, and then provide them with services and pathways away from a life of violent crime. Accepting help is not a requirement, but stopping violence is. We know that violent crime in our city is heavily concentrated within areas of high poverty, housing abandonment, and clusters of drug activity from both users and dealers. Our officers work closely through patrol and investigative units to gain intelligence with our community to identify and apprehend those responsible, and with nonprofit organizations to provide trauma-informed care, community-led crime prevention efforts, and resources to victims of crime and addiction. We all have a shared goal to reduce homicides and shootings and keep those at the very highest risk of harming others and being harmed themselves safe and alive. Together, we are investing in prevention, intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry in order to strengthen our comprehensive violence reduction strategies. It is important to note a recent study from University of Pennsylvania's Crime and Justice Policy Lab found no evidence of displacement when analyzing whether the focus population moved from the Western District to adjacent districts. So I am confident the strategy is working, and I am very optimistic that expanding to the Southwestern District and eventually across the city is going to prove fruitful. I know that the ongoing cross-collaboration with Mayor Scott, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, the State's Attorney's Office, our law enforcement partners, and our community members will lead to success and positive results in the Southwestern and overall violent crime reduction throughout our city. Thank you, and at this time, I'll call up Director Jackson.
Good afternoon, folks. My name's Shantay Jackson, and I'm the director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, who is struggling to get this mic right. There we go. Thank you, council member. We are here with you today because we have a mayor who believes that every Baltimorean deserves to be safe, alive, and free. It's no secret that our city has tried to implement focused deterrent strategy in the past, not once, but twice. It's also no secret that those attempts were unsuccessful. I remember when we finished the problem analysis that would inform where the group violence reduction strategy pilot would go first, we wrapped that problem analysis up in 2021, and I was floored to learn that the Western District had 818 people who had been shot, either fatally or non-fatally, over the prior 5-year period. I want us to take a beat and consider that in a 5-year period, in one district, 818 people were either killed or victimized by gun violence. and that doesn't even begin to factor in the countless number of people who were left forever impacted. Today, because of the work of the Scott administration and the folks who are here with me, because of the group violence reduction strategy, Baltimore's most historically violent district is seeing lives be saved, is seeing the trajectory of people's journey be changed for the better. Let's take a look at the data. Since implementation of the strategy in January of this year, the Western District has seen a 31% decrease in non-fatal shootings and a 36% decrease in homicides year over year, for an aggregate decrease in gun violence of 33.8%. This means that the Western has gone from being the most violent district in our city as it relates to gun violence to the least violent among other historically chronic violent districts, including the Eastern, the Southern, and the Southwestern. Also, as of December 6th, the program has conducted 132 custom notification referrals. That's where Baltimoreans who've been identified as being at acute risk of perpetrating or being victims of gun violence are contacted by Muncie staff members, by law enforcement officials, by community-based partners to accept services. Baltimore, as of today, 71 people have accepted those services. If you take a look at the next poster board, you will see a month-over-month comparison of homicides and non-fatals in the Western for two different time periods. The far right column represents 2021 when compared to 2022, and the column to its left represents a 7-year average compared to 2022. Looking at November and comparing 2021 to 2022, homicides in the Western are down month over month by 67%. Non-fatals are down by 86%. And Baltimore, when we look at the 7-year average of those numbers, factoring in a post-Freddie Gray uprising and a global pandemic, we're doing even better, with homicides down 80% month over month and non-fatals down 86%. As we present the next steps in expansion of this work, I want to be clear that even though we began in a single district, GVRS was and has always been a city-wide strategy. Over the last 11 months, we've used the pilot in the Western as a proof of concept to show that Baltimore can benefit from focused deterrence when we appropriately implement it, to show that transformation of our city is possible. I'm proud to say that we do consider the demonstration project complete. A few minutes ago, you heard the mayor say that the Southwestern is our first expansion district. So why the Southwestern? First, there were a few things that we had to consider. One of the most important being redistricting for two main reasons. Number one, redistricting taking effect at the top of the year and Mayor Scott's commitment to scaling GVRS at the top of the year. That means that we had to consider the change in the relative distribution of gun violence in our city. After redistricting takes effect in the first quarter, the Southwestern is projected to account for 16% of the city's total gun violence. It will make it the largest percentage of all of our districts. Number two, resource capacity had to be a major consideration for expansion. The Southwestern District already houses critical resources that are essential for us to scale up and for this implementation to work in the long term. That includes 2 district action teams and a Baltimore Crime Intelligence Center. Earlier, I mentioned that this wasn't the first time that Baltimore attempted to focus time and energy on group violence reduction. And you might be wondering what's different this time around. Political transitions and frequent upper management turnover were destabilizing forces the last time. There was a lack of governance, and accountability measures were not in place to make sure that the strategy wouldn't be vulnerable to systems change. We had underdeveloped social service infrastructure and a lack of community engagement. To be frank, we made promises to folks that if they stepped away from the life and took advantage of opportunities, that we would be there. In those past 2 iterations, we didn't do that. This time, under Mayor Scott's leadership, we've taken the time to ensure that this iteration of focused deterrence delivers on the promise of balancing opportunity and consequence. And we know that to be true because the impact that employing community moral voices like the ones that are standing with us today and service provision has had significant impacts on driving down gun violence in the Western. It, quite frankly, is undeniable. Life coaching accounts for almost 41% of the services that folks who have accepted services are requesting. Other services include housing assistance, employment, emergency relocation, and cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT. CBT is all about making sure that folks understand how to reconcile what they're feeling against what they're thinking and ultimately against how they behave. It's what emotional regulation and effective conflict management is all about. We quite often hear the mayor talking about the importance of conflict resolution in our communities. This is all about emotional regulation, and that's what CBT is about. GVRS is a community-driven strategy, and enforcement mechanisms are the last resort. While we launched the proof of concept in the Western, GVRS has always been a citywide strategy, and we're going to expand this strategy in 3 to 4 steps. So I want to draw your attention here to the scale-up plan and remind folks that I said 3 to 4 steps, not 3 to 4 years. We're going to be really strategic in our sequencing to make sure that we cover all of Baltimore. So building from the strength of the Western District pilot, we're going to expand to the Southwestern in the first quarter of 2023. The Central District's shared borders and connectivity with other districts gives us a strategic advantage during further expansion, and also for the same reasons as the Southwestern, including violence, connectivity, and available resources, the Central's going to be the second expansion district in Q1, Q2 of 2023. As you can see in looking at the first or the second portion of the map here, when you combine the Western, the Southwestern, and the Central, they will account for 40% of citywide homicides and non-fatal shootings. You'll see that the expansion to the Eastern will follow in Q3 of 2023, followed by the Southern in Q3, Q4 of 2023, the Northwestern and the Southeastern in Q1, Q2 of 2024, and lastly, the Northern and the Northeastern in Q2 of 2024. In the words of my friend and my partner in this work who stands behind me, Ray Kelly, this strategy has been tried before, but it has never been done before, until now. I'm grateful to the tremendous partnership with the folks that you see standing alongside me, including the council members that stand with us today. I'm grateful to our mayor, who recognizes that violence is not an unsolvable problem, and that deep adaptive challenges require creative, coordinated, collaborative solutions. And I'm grateful to you, Baltimore, for never giving up, for maintaining hope, for understanding the time that it takes to execute on a vision where a city can be safe, alive, and free. Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Director Jackson, and thank you for your leadership. So you all know now how we're going to move forward with this strategy. We are pleased with the results now, but if you know me, you know I'm very impatient. The director knows that very well, and we look forward to seeing this strategy expand throughout Baltimore. And with that, we will take questions. Lo, over to the mic. They're recording it, Lo. You're good. Brittany?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I'll start with one question. I know that the next areas where this will be launched was data-driven. Can you talk about why GVRS does not eliminate traditional policing, but it enhances it?
Yeah, I'll start and then I'll let both the director and the commissioner answer that too. You've heard me say multiple times, Brittany, that when you're talking about tackling an issue as long-standing as violence in Baltimore City, you'd be a fool to think that one thing's going to solve it, because the reality is if one thing was going to solve it, we wouldn't be talking about it, right? Because they've been trying to cure this disease in Baltimore solely through regular quote-unquote policing for longer than I've been alive. What you're seeing now is an investment in all of the things, not just GVRS. This is a great important portion, working with those people that we know are most at risk, right? Because when we think about any other disease, when folks like myself and others who've had prostate or breast cancer in their families, we know they're at risk. So what do? We focus on those people, telling them what they need to do. We can do the same thing for gun violence, and that's what we're doing here. But that's on top of what the police department does every day. That's on top of what our Safe Streets and our violence intervention workers do every day in West Baltimore and across the city. That's on top of the investment that you're now seeing in these communities. Councilman Torrance and I were just talking about a brand new rec center that's getting ready to be built over in West Baltimore. We have new schools being built there. We have new homes and housing being built there. Those are the kind of things that you have to do all of the above when you're talking about eradicating something that has been in our city and in certain portions of our city for decades. And let's not fool ourselves into thinking that that is not directly tied to disinvestment that was done in those areas on purpose, right? We're talking about West Baltimore, the police that birthed the highway to nowhere, where we destroyed a middle-class black community for a highway that doesn't exist. This is what we're talking about when we talk about undoing that systemic disinvestment in every way that we can. Director?
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your question, Brittany. To answer it more pointedly, why it doesn't remove the need for traditional policing. The group violence reduction strategy, or focused deterrence, as a proven strategy for decades now, is one that is meant to focus on gun violence that is generated by groups or social networks. We know that all crime in Baltimore City isn't about gun violence. There are other criminal elements and criminal components of law enforcement that my partner here would need to continue to engage with. That's the first point. The second point that I would make around this strategy is that when implemented correctly, it affords us the opportunity to really think through what truth and reconciliation conversations look like between Baltimore and the Baltimore Police Department. It affords the Baltimore Police Department, under Commissioner Harrison's leadership, the opportunity to demonstrate that cultural changes truly have happened in how they approach even those folks that have made some decisions that they shouldn't have made. And so when done appropriately, you see a deepening of community and police relations. When done correctly, you see law enforcement case clearance rates improve. Sir, would you add anything here?
I think they both said it very well. What I will add is it is a paradigm shift in the way we think. It does not replace traditional policing. That will always continue. But for far too long, there's been a total reliance on just policing, deployment, and police investigations as enforcement. We have to add changing life conditions, which is a different way of thinking for police. We have to change life conditions because the decision to commit the crime is about the life condition. And if we can change the life condition, young men will make better decisions about whether or not to commit crime. That's what we're working on in addition to enforcement. And so that's the only thing that I would add for.
And then, Director Jackson, you said life coaching accounts for 41% of the services that people have accepted. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit more in depth?
Sure. So I think a lot of folks in Baltimore probably would think that life coaching is analogous to mentoring for young people. I would offer that it's a bit more sophisticated than that, and we've got our partners here who I would encourage you to ask some follow-up questions to. Life coaching affords folks who take advantage of it the opportunity to have someone that truly understands what your life experiences have been, who empathizes with you in non-judgmental ways, who you can call whenever you need to call. We aren't talking about a check-in with a mentor once a week. We're talking about, I need to talk to you now, and again in 2 hours, and again in 4, and again in 6, because there are things happening in my life right now, and I want to make sure that I'm making the best decisions for me. I understand that you want me to stay safe, alive, and free, and so do I, and I trust that if I have conversations with you, you will help me do that. We've seen an overwhelming amount of participants dig deep into that space, and we've seen our service partners, and YAP is here with us today, be extremely responsive to the folks who are calling on them for that need.
Okay, and this is my last question. Oh, Mayor Scott, did you want to ask him? My last question directed towards Commissioner Harrison. I know this is a group violence reduction strategy, so you're specifically focusing on groups that you are offering these services to. Can you sort of talk about how this is different and how this is helping you as the commissioner implement everything that you're trying to do in the city in order to reduce this violence?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's helping me, and it's helping all the members of the police department because it's a smarter way of enforcing. It actually is helping young men make better decisions. If we can change their life conditions so that they would not make a decision to commit violent crime in the very first place, then we are preventing more people from becoming victims. We're preventing them from becoming perpetrators and ending up into the criminal justice system, and we're helping to prevent them from becoming victims of gun violence themselves. And so we're helping in a number of ways, but it is removing the burden of responding to as many and dealing with as many people who are negatively affected and because they are traumatized, both by becoming victims of shooting and perpetrators of shooting. And we're reducing that trauma. We're reducing the need to engage with them in an enforcement capacity because we're actually helping them have a pathway away from crime. And it's a smarter, more constitutional, more legitimate way of policing than just delivering calls for service and investigations and locking people up. This is police legitimacy at its best.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. For Director Jackson, if you could kind of maybe walk us through kind of practically how this may work, how people are identified, and then kind of next steps, and also talk about the funding challenges of scaling this up, and for the commissioner and the mayor, kind of some reaction to the 19-year-old this weekend, the pregnant woman who was murdered, and update in that investigation. Thank you.
Yep, thanks for your question. So the way the process works is, and let's just walk through what the Western District does every single week. I just left. Today is Tuesday. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m., there's a shooting review. That shooting review looks at every shooting that has happened in the district over the prior week, whether it's a fatal shooting or a non-fatal shooting. During that shooting review, you have not just BPD in the room, but you have MONSE, the state's attorney's office, USAO, you have parole and probation, you have the correctional system. We've got federal partners in that room to make sure that all of our local, state, and city agencies are in the room at the same time, sharing intelligence. The intelligence that they share during that meeting then helps them to determine who's at the highest risk of being shot or being a shooter as a result of that shooting, right? So who is most likely to retaliate if this member is a group-involved individual? Who is most likely to become the next victim because there is belief or intelligence that a certain individual in another group is the trigger puller for this particular case? So coming out of that, and you heard me reference 132 custom notification referrals, those are the referrals that come out of that Tuesday meeting and go into a Thursday meeting with community-based organizations like YAP, with our community moral voice partners, with other folks who are part of this work to say, let's strategize how we're going to begin to engage these 3 individuals who we believe are at the highest risk coming out of this particular shooting review. And then the work happens. whether that means going on the streets and finding folks, whether it means leveraging the fact that they're under supervision with parole and probation, and have a probation officer compel them to come to a space so that we can make that offer of service, or whether it means it's a law enforcement only direct notification because the person is already incarcerated, where you then have BPD partnering with DPSES and going behind the wall to deliver the message. So that is, you know, on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, how this works. And as a result, you've seen that we've got 71 folks who have said, yes, I want opportunities. Yes, I'm asking for the help that you were saying that you are offering and that we've been able to deliver on because of Mayor Scott's promise. I think the other questions are for you two.
Thank you. I'll start first by saying, first and most importantly, that my prayers and thoughts are with the family, but really want to speak to the individual who did such a heinous thing and anybody that knows that we will find that person, right? And we will find that person, and we want them to just come out now. Don't make us find you. Do the right thing. Say, I did it, woman up, man up, whatever you want to call it, because we will not continue to allow people, and for those who may be close to this individual, someone is allowing a person who shot a pregnant woman to sleep in their bed, on their couch at night. Imagine if that was your daughter, your sister, your cousin, your aunt, whoever in your family. How would you feel? We need folks to help us find this person so that we can do right by that young woman and that baby and that family and our city, and turn them over to the other parts of the justice system. Commissioner?
I think the mayor said it best, but I'd add that they can do it anonymously. They can call Crime Stoppers at 1-866-7-LOCK-UP and help us find who did this swiftly. We know that somebody knows. That we know. And so we're asking, and we are imploring that someone who heard something, knows something, seen something, call us right away. It's an ongoing investigation. Our detectives are still working around the clock, looking for evidence, looking for witnesses, and we're willing to take any information that comes, so we need it right away.
Just a short question. In the back in November, there was some documentation that shows that there was a budget. I'm just curious about the budget for, was it around $18 million, or is that a figure off? And I guess if that is off, what is the budget, and where is the money coming from?
So the majority of the dollars for the group violence reduction strategy as it relates to the direct service provision, so paying our service providers, making sure that we've got enough funding for stipends, for emergency relocation, for transitional employment, is a part of MONSE's $50 million ARPA allocation. $23 million of that ARPA allocation is specifically dedicated to gun violence. And you all might recall that the mayor has a dual integrated approach to gun violence, one being community violence intervention and one being the group violence reduction strategy. I want to be really clear in saying that community violence intervention is a core component of the GVRS strategy. And so there is about $13 million that is being invested over the next few fiscal years around direct service provision. With regard to the technical assistance that we are getting from our national partners, our local philanthropy has taken care of funding the first year of that work. We've got 2 more years worth of funding, and I'll leave the good news to the mayor to share with regard to the balance of that funding. All of that said, I want to be really clear in saying that MONSE has been thoughtful about what sustainability of this work looks like and has been forecasting all along what it's going to take monetarily to get through the completion of the mayor's 5-year comprehensive violence prevention plan. So it wasn't just a what that we created or staffing, but also how do we get to the right funding diversification mix to make sure that it's sustainable.
Thank you, and I'll just add very quickly that we are very grateful to all of our partners who have seen that this strategy is something that we should invest in. I want to be very grateful to our partners from Johns Hopkins, from T. Rowe Price, from Brown Advisory, from also the ABLE Foundation, and I know I'm missing one. and Goldsacker Foundation for stepping up to the plate. Baltimore has a community that really believes in this strategy, and we look forward to expanding it and working with others. Next.
Thanks. Follow up on the ARPA points. So if I'm understanding the breakdown of that funding correctly, all of the ARPA money that's going into GVRS is on the service side. Can you speak to the importance of basically finding, or how do we find ways to sustain that service side to make sure that this is a balanced approach, not just the law enforcement side?
Yeah, that's the work that we're going to be continuing to do. But when you do this and you're data-driven and you have partners that are analyzing it, this is how you can go, again, working with our philanthropic partners, our business community, but also doing the tough work of looking at how the city can further our investment into agencies like MONSE to make sure that this work continues, because that's what we will do.
Question maybe for Commissioner Harrison. You've talked some about the staffing shortages that BPD is facing. We talked to the police union about the GVRS expansion plans, and they raised concerns about whether this is possible with the limited staffing resources that we have right now. What are your thoughts on that? And if you could just talk into some more specifics about how the city does this pretty ambitious expansion given the staffing constraints.
Well, the expansion of GVRS from one district to two does not mean that we replicate the number of people that already exist in the group violence unit, that we double that one for one to move into another district. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means reallocation of duties, retooling of the responsibilities of what already exists in the Southwest District. Yes, there will be some additions that will come, but for right now, it is about repurposing. You heard Director Jackson talk about the 2 district action teams. We can retool one of the teams or both of the teams or as many of the people as we need to be able to assist with the number of things that are already happening in Western to start happening in Southwestern, with the shooting reviews, with the engagement, the investigations, and the enforcement. So it's not about adding more people, but it is about being smart about the way we use people and converting what we already have into a useful investigating tool to support GVRS.
One follow-up on that. When it comes to some of the districts further down the line where, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but not all of them have the same number of district action teams, if I'm understanding correctly, does that present further challenges as you get into other districts?
That will always present challenges because as you look at the rate we're hiring and the rate people are leaving, and we're trying to bring more people on quickly, and we're trying to keep more people on longer. That's always going to be a challenge, but that's why we have to be smart about the use of our resources, and that's why we have to be smart about the strategy, that we can try to prevent people from making the bad decision in the first place, so we're not chasing as many crimes and helping as many victims on the back end.
Thank you.
I just had a general question about the scale-up itself. There's maybe some out there saying, well, I live in a neighborhood that's really violent right now. There's progress. We see that in a little section. But how confident are you down the line going to mid-2024 that this really will work, that it really will drive down the numbers on a whole for the city?
Yeah, I'll start and let Director Jackson come right behind me on this. I think when you're solving a problem, right, if you're dealing with any big organization, anything, you have to start where the problem is the worst. There is no one that would say that West Baltimore hasn't been the most violent place in Baltimore City for quite some time. And we are doing this in the most responsible way. But when you have that impact, and let's not be fooled that when you have the amount of the highest percentage that we have in the Western, when you start there and you move to the connected districts where there's some overlap, where there's some connectivity to groups, and you replicate that success, that will bring our violence down in the city continuously. This is about doing it the right way. What I will remind Baltimore of is the previous 2 failed attempts. If you want to do it wrong, do what we did the last 2 times. Go fast, go quick, go to everyone. We know that doesn't work. We've seen in cities across the country that this approach worked. It's working for us. We are going to make sure that we follow the data. We're not going to be guessing and shooting at the hip with this. We're going to be following data about where we need to go in the order we need to go, and that's how we're going to do it, because this is about saving lives in Baltimore in the best and most efficient way possible.
Thank you for your question. So 2 points. I put this diagram back up to demonstrate what is known as a diffusion of benefits. So while we're in the Western District right now, and we see that district down 33.8%, if you look at the districts that are immediately adjacent to it, the 2 districts that we'll be going into next, the Southwestern and the Central, you'll also see that numbers are down there. Here's the story that I'll tell to make that point really clear. Custom notification referral to an individual who was supposed to meet Pastor McKentry at his church in the Western District on Fayette Street. That individual didn't know what was going on and so decided not to come. The pastor calls this individual and says, "Where are you?" He says, "I'm on Penn North." Penn North is where the Central and the Western meet. He was able to sign that person up for services. They were able to have a very real conversation. And so when we talk about the sequence with which we move into additional districts, even districts that we aren't in, who are on the periphery, who are adjacent to districts, because crime doesn't see those district boundary lines, they're invisible. Those neighborhoods, those city blocks, those adjacent districts will begin to see a diffusion of benefits as demonstrated here.
Thank you.
I want to talk about the crime displacement. The commissioner said that there was a study from the University of Pennsylvania looking at that. We've done a lot of reporting on the crime and looking at the crime displacement. If we're seeing the decreases in homicides and non-fatal shootings in the Western, and you say that crime displacement isn't happening, how do you explain the homicides and the non-fatal shooting statistics that we're still seeing continue to surpass 300? And if crime displacement isn't happening, what is happening?
So I think, Mackenzie, I'll start by, again, pointing to the map here that you can see when you're talking about, quote unquote, the displacement from one district to the next, the Central and the Southwestern. Well, Jeremy Biddle, our technical advisor, is going to come up and address that. But you can see that, as you heard from Director Jackson, that's simply not the case. But also, just so that you be mindful and that we're telling the full truth, while none of us up here are celebrating that violence is gone in Baltimore, we are talking about a significant step in the right direction of seeing violence be reduced at this level in our most violent district, but also that even as we stand here today, that homicides and shootings, while we are over 300, are down from last year as well, right? So that's the reality of the facts. But when you have the technical advisors that we have, when you have the proof in the pudding, not guessing, not taglines, not trying to play on people's emotions, but real, actual data, you can show how we're going to continue to move. And also, when you have the cultural understanding in Baltimore, you know that someone that is out in Penn North, they're not moving to North and Gay. That's just not typically what happens in Baltimore. You don't go from being an East Side drug dealer to a West Side drug dealer and vice versa. You stay in the places that you know, and you're known, so to speak. Jeremy?
Mayor, I just want to say, homicides are down 3 from this time last year. Is that?
I would say, like I said to you before, Mackenzie, for me, I know for you guys that 3 lives aren't much. It's just a blurb on the news. But for me, in Baltimoreans, that's 3 people still alive. That's 3 families. And we want it to next time be 40, 50, 60, 70. You have to start somewhere. But to say that, oh, it's only 3, I guess that means that you've never had no one in your family shot and murdered on the streets of Baltimore. That means it's not just those 3 people. That's 3 communities that have been traumatized. That's 3 kids without a parent. That's 3 parents without a kid anymore. That's people who have the breadwinner now gone from them. This is what we're talking about. This is a start. We're not celebrating anything. This is a start. Everything that we talk about plays a part in that, from where the weapons come from. The last 5 guns that we've been able to trace in Baltimore come from Alabama, Ohio, Georgia, and of course Florida, right? We have to do all of these things, because when we see, especially on TV stations run by certain companies, folks talking about violence in certain cities, and that they're talking about these right-wing Republicans talking about how violent cities are. Ironically, it's those states that are fueling the violence with the illegal weapons that come in there. We should talk about the entire story, and 3 lives in Baltimore for me means a lot. Jeremy?
Thank you very much. Jeremy Biddle. I am part of the technical assistance team supporting the city with GVRS. You raise an interesting question with displacement, and we found it so interesting, in fact, that we decided to do 4 separate analyses. We looked at people touched by the strategy and their subsequent arrests. We looked at homicide and non-fatal shooting victims in adjacent districts in the city. Ran the names of victim suspects and POIs by Western District Intel to see if there were any ties to the Western District. We did a focus group with the DAT teams and Intel officers, and we also looked at crime gun recoveries to see if there are any changes in trends. The bottom line, consistent with all 4 analyses, no evidence of displacement. In fact, if you look at academic literature, more often you won't see displacement, you will see what Director Jackson alluded to, a diffusion of benefits. And I think you raised an interesting question about if the strategy is working, why are we where we are? Look at the counterfactual. If the strategy had not been implemented, just a very rough back of the envelope analysis, we would be up 5% in both homicides and non-fatal shootings. That would be the alternative. That would be where we would be in the absence of the strategy. Thank you.
Looking through the news release that comes out, it says that there will be minimum capacity benchmarks for each different district. Can you explain what those capacity benchmarks will be to ensure that this program is working as it's scaled up and expanded across the city?
Thanks for your question, Mackenzie. These key performance indicators shouldn't be new to Baltimore. We've been sharing them publicly during the city council meetings every single month for the past 3 months. So these key performance indicators really revolve around the intelligence that comes out of these shooting reviews and how many recommendations or referrals to custom notifications we're making, but not just the referrals. How many folks are actually taking advantage of those services? How many folks we've made referrals to who are engaging in life coaching? How many folks are still safe, alive, and free come 2-3 years after this work is done? How many of those folks who have decided not to take advantage of this and who are part of strategic enforcement efforts have been prosecuted? And at what level? Is it at the state's attorney's level, the AG's level, the USAO's level? Happy to share I actually think we are sharing after this the entire key performance indicator dashboard, or what we call GVRS stat, publicly, so that all of Baltimore has access to it on our website and don't have to just find out what those statistics look like on the news.
Emily?
All right, just one quick one from me. The schedule for this implementation starts to get a lot more aggressive at the end of 23 into 24, where you're saying you're going to be citywide by that point. Given that, you've also talked about mistakes made in the past, and that rushing was a big problem that led to past failures of this, why are you confident that you can get this entirely citywide by 2024?
Yeah, thank you for that. Director Jackson will take it, but I'll just say, Emily, that really quickly, that the last time they went from 1 and tried to do the next 8 all at once, which was a very, very, very bad thing to do.
I'm so glad we have graphics to help answer the questions. So if you take a look,
Thank you.
Yes. So if you take a look here at 2022 Q1, the Western District. Through redistricting, the Western District is going to absorb an additional 9% of our city's gun violence, meaning that it will make up 15% of the total citywide. We are already in this district. As I mentioned earlier, when we bring the Southwestern and the Central on, we're talking in aggregate 40% of the city's violence. And then the Eastern and the Southern District getting us up to covering 64% of the city's violence. So Emily, to your point around the last 4 districts happening in that singular year, they are currently our least or projected to be our least violent districts after redistricting. And so that is absolutely a question that Jeremy and I went back and forth on a lot, and one that if we need to call an audible, I'll be calling an audible. But based on what we forecast right now, based on the relative distribution of gun violence, we feel confident that after addressing 64% of this city's group-involved violence, that we can handle the balance of those districts.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of talk of data transparency, and this has been great in terms of getting the information out to the public. When can we expect to see the same level of transparency about what's happening in the data that you talk about so much that's driving a lot of this for the other CVI programs that are operational in the city?
So I think that we tell you guys all the time that what our Safe Streets folks do, but I think it's important to note, and I'll let Director Jackson expand upon that, that when you're talking about credible messaging work, you have to be very particular about what you say publicly, because if we're out there telling our folks that we're going to talk to you in a way that you don't have to worry about seeing on the news, that you don't have to worry about someone giving up your confidentiality when you're doing things that could cost you your life, you have to be very particular about that. But we share a lot of data around that, and the director will go into how we're going to continue to grow that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we articulated, I believe a few months ago, an academic evaluation was underway for Safe Streets by Dr. Daniel Webster and the team at Johns Hopkins. That evaluation has been completed. Those results have been shared with me. We are scheduling time to share them with the mayor and with the city council, and we'll be sharing them publicly along the timeline that we committed, which was the end of this year into the beginning of next year. Daniel Webster stands ready to make sure that we're having conversations with Baltimore about the impact, the real impact, the true impact that Safe Streets in particular has had since inception in 2007. In addition to that, you all can expect that there is going to be an announcement sometime after the first of the year with regard to our CVI Advisory Board, which is made up of a whole host of Baltimoreans cross-sector, including returning citizens, to inform this work in ways that ensure that it is delivered as appropriate. In addition to that, Crystal Miller, who works as our CVI Deputy Director, is partnering with me and with our data analytics team to produce an annual report for Safe Streets specifically. But as we think about the CVI ecosystem as a whole, that's never existed here in Baltimore City before. And so we've actually got to have the time to build the data. This is the first administration that thought that it was wise to connect the work between mediation and intervention with victim services and with mental health supports. And so while that reporting won't be ready at the top of the year because we're still building it, I think your question is rooted in Safe Streets.
Correct.
And I am going to say what I've said for months now. Safe Streets will be reported on from an external evaluator sometime in the next 60 days or so.
Will that include the number of mediations, the number of employees, and the community-based organizations, how they structure all of that? Those are all questions we've been trying to get answered, and we haven't been able to.
Was that it?
So Mackenzie, I think that we have been sharing the number of mediations consistently, but all the things that you're asking for will be every month we share the mediations. I know sometimes you guys aren't paying attention at press conferences, but we share that every month and we will continue to do so. Thank you, everybody.